really big companies are making plans to electrify their really big fleets of vehicles. This means really big EV chargers create big impacts on the electrical grid. We'll talk about whether or not our grid can handle this electrification transition, what needs to be done to minimize impact, and the surprising benefits fleet electrification creates for the greatest swell. Please welcome to the stage Philip Tucker, Senior Utility DER Advisory Program Manager for NextLab, and Ben Prohaska, Executive Director of Electrification Coalition. Take it over, gentlemen. And hey, I got your name right, didn't I?
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thanks, everybody, for joining us here for our talk today. My goal for our time is to share our enthusiasm about fleet electrification, talk about the problems and the opportunities that come up with fleet electrification, and how Panasonic is trying to bring those opportunities to life and address those problems. I thought before we got too far, though, that I'd share a little bit of background of why we're doing this, what inspires us, what gets us going in this. And, on Wednesday, I went to a keynote where Arnold Schwarzenegger was there. It was pretty cool to see that guy in person. And he shared a pretty sobering statistic, and that is 7 million people a year around the world die from air pollution. And that number really shocked me. That's a massive number of people. And he kept going by saying, this needs to stop now. And he kind of looked at us and challenged everybody in the room that we need to start addressing this. We need to bring the solutions to end this problem, and we can do it. And you can see as you walk around our booth that Panasonic can't agree with Arnie any more than that. We want to be part of that solution. We want to change the world in that way. You can see as you walk around our booth, we're all about our green impact mission. We have some of the best engineers in the world working on this problem in a lot of different areas, from our solar, from our heat pumps, to batteries, and all kinds of solutions. Panasonic is leading the way on this. And that really inspires me and my group. I'm part of the NextLab group in the Smart Mobility office, and we're focused on transportation. And the reason we're focused on transportation is, well, transportation creates it's the largest source of emissions in the U.S., just transportation. And if you dive into that even more, if you break down the transportation sector, the medium and heavy-duty vehicles in transportation make up only 10% of the vehicles on the road, but they contribute 29% of the emissions in the transportation sector. So we really view focusing on fleet vehicles and medium and heavy-duty fleets or vehicles as really our biggest bang for the buck for what we're working on. And our goal is to help advance and accelerate the electrification of fleet vehicles. But as we do this is a big problem. I mean, it's a challenging thing to get fleets to electrify. We've talked to a lot of fleet customers. We're working very closely with many of them, and we've heard, they have a job. They need to get things where they need to go on time at the lowest cost possible. And they're very good at it with what they do now. With the vehicles they use now, the tools they have, they're very effective at this. So you can imagine why they might be a little hesitant about electrifying their vehicles. This is a big change in the way they're going to operate. And they're worried that they're going to have to wait for vehicles to charge, and they're going to have more costs than they were expecting, right? Batteries aren't cheap. Electricity isn't cheap either. It keeps getting more expensive, it seems like. So there's hesitancy there that we want to help them with. But there's also another side of the equation that hasn't existed before, is electric utilities. And that's really my background. I come from the utility industry, and I know utilities are really worried about fleets electrifying. Fleets, as they electrify and build these charging depots, we're talking about huge loads on the power grid, dozens of megawatts just for a single site. And not only that, the vehicles move. So the utilities don't even know where this load is going to be on their grid and how they're going to support that and how they're going to maintain a reliable grid that's affordable for everybody and clean. This is a big challenge they're facing. and they're not quite sure how to do it. And that's what my team is focused on. We have built a product called PEFSA, which stands for the Panasonic E-Fleet Solutions of America. And we're right in the middle between those fleet operators and the electric utilities. We're solving the problem for fleet operators so they can feel confident when they buy those electric vehicles that they will be charged when they need them, and they'll be able to run the routes that they have planned for them, while also charging at the lowest possible cost for them. So their fuel costs are going to be even lower than what they're operating with now. So we're making that a reality for our fleet customers. And then on the utility side, as we work with the fleet customers, we know where those vehicles are going to charge, and we can help manage the charging to make sure they're charging at the most ideal time for the grid, helping utilities avoid expensive infrastructure upgrades, and actually passing on those savings to all of us, to you and me at our houses, and for the fleet customers too. So we believe working in the middle is the best opportunity to help accelerate the growth of electric vehicles in the fleet space. So we actually have some pilots going on. They're very exciting. We're not quite ready to share about those specific pilots this year. Come back next year, and we'll tell you some of the details on that. But I brought Ben here because we believe it's going to take a whole lot of people to help work on this problem. It's not just Panasonic. It takes our friends like at the Electrification Coalition and many others to help push this forward and to drive the electrification forward. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about those opportunities and challenges and hopefully get you guys all excited about this. And we want everybody here to be working towards this together. So let me pause there, and I'll hand it over to Ben. So Ben is the executive director of the Electrification Coalition. Ben, we're super glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Could you share a little bit about yourself and the Electrification Coalition?
Sure. Well, thank you, Philip. And I'm excited to be here. Panasonic is a partner of the Electrification Coalition, and so it's great when we get to work together on moments like this and talk about actually implementing solutions. For those who aren't aware, the Electrification Coalition is a national organization that is working to accelerate transportation electrification. And so Philip talked a little bit about why, and there's a lot of reasons that transportation electrification ultimately are an important solution. Our framing on this and the reason we do it is because of the economic and national security implications associated with oil dependency in the U.S. And so we, every single day, we are putting our country at great economic and national security risk because we have to basically spend $80 billion to protect the flow of oil that allows us to power how we move. But with transportation electrification, by plugging into the grid, we ultimately can reduce that demand and basically end our dependency on oil. And so, we're at this point though. I've been working on this for 10 years. I started working on transportation electrification, and actually Philip and I, funny enough, it comes from Fort Collins, and I started a little project there called Drive Electric Northern Colorado, and it was intended to help accelerate the market. And so we did these great projects with the city where we were centered on how do you actually think about fleet electrification for the city fleet, how do you work with the utility to think about where the substations need to be developed, and how do you think about the long-term demand as EVs are coming online, not just for consumer vehicles but for fleet vehicles as well. But for the EC, we basically work at the local, state, and federal level. We work on policy, and so we've been very engaged in things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a really important policy that is providing incentives and credits that are going to help accelerate the market at a scale that is a once-in-a-generation opportunity from a policy perspective. We also were very heavily engaged and have continued to be very heavily engaged in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And for people who aren't aware, that policy basically is going to establish the funding and now the framework to build a national electric vehicle infrastructure. And that's a big deal. We're talking about the idea of finally connecting our cities and our states and our communities with charging infrastructure across the country, and at a scale that we have yet to see in the U.S. And the exciting thing about this policy and the work we do is we also then get we get our hands dirty, we implement. And so on the fleet side, we have done several things. One is we created an aggregated purchasing program called the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative. And so if anybody's interested, you can go to evfleets.org, and it has all kinds of technical background about sort of why fleet or EVs can meet fleet applications and how they can succeed at doing the job that they're there for. But not only that, helping develop all of the total cost of operation modeling, the GHG emission impacts, kind of a one-stop shop so that when cities or even private fleets for that matter are thinking about whether or not EVs can meet their needs, they can plug in the data of their fleets, and it'll immediately generate all of the vehicles that meet the cost index right now. Like they will, right out of the gates, will actually save money. Which ones in the future will save money, and then what vehicles are available in the market to trade out. And so we also are reducing the soft costs of acquisition so that cities and others can buy vehicles through an aggregated purchasing model, and that really saves some of the time that it takes to acquire vehicles and essentially flip their fleets. We also have created something called the Electric Freight Consortium, and when you talked about really big fleets, and this is where the rubber's really meeting the road, so to speak, because this is a program that's designed to bring together the sort of full ecosystem of the freight sector and help solve problems that exist with freight electrification. And while you're here, if you're walking around, it used to be if you'd come to the Consumer Electronics Show, you would have seen maybe one or two EVs, and they would be smaller platform vehicles. But now if you go to the West Hall, they're all the way up through Class 8 semis. In fact, I was at the John Deere spot, and they're electrifying tractors. It just shows that we're on the verge of electrifying everything, and it's an exciting moment because we need to do this from a society standpoint. We have huge impacts from air quality that you discussed and that the governor talked about, the governator, as we used to call him, talked about. But we also, and we have oil dependency, but we're now at the point where the policies and the technology are ready. And we can do this at scale. And it's happening globally, but it's not without challenge. There's going to be some work to do, and it is new technology. The cool thing is, as you walk around CES and you blow your mind at all the cool innovation, we're at this place where it's innovation at scale, and it's innovation that is being applied in a way that is going to revolutionize the way we move. And it's exciting to be a part of that right now. Like, we're at that stage where you're literally driving the future. And it actually reminds me of a William Gibson quote, and then we can maybe get into some of the other questions and discussion, but it's like the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I think that's where we're at with the technology, is that it can meet all our needs, but we have to build it out and we have to distribute it. And I think the policy and the work that we do at the EC is ultimately positioning us to meet that reality, and I think it's going to happen really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. When I walked through the West Hall, I was blown away how many electric vehicles are out there, how cool they are, how advanced they are, and how quickly things are evolving and changing in this landscape. And I think a huge part of that is the work that you guys have been doing on the policy side, driving that forward. With that in place, we're seeing a lot of investments going into this space, and making that technology more available to everybody and more robust. And we're super excited to see that growth occurring and this really huge revolution occurring in the transportation space. So thanks for all the work you guys are doing. That's pretty exciting stuff. So as this is growing so fast, though, let's get back to the main point of this conversation. we have seen problems on the grid recently, especially California, Texas, these major blackouts, and and that's having a huge impact on people's lives as well. I mean, very significant impacts, and utilities are worried about this continuing reliability issue, and especially with fleets as they electrify. As I mentioned, huge loads on the grid. I guess I'm curious from your perspective. Do you think fleets are going to continue to add to this problem on the grid that we have, or what are the challenges we're facing, and how should we address them?
I was just saying, starting point. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but EVs are actually going to make the grid work better. Makes it more efficient. It's actually, the EVs are going to be capable of providing demand response solutions. And a lot of times when we have these like sort of peak incidents, right? So what you're talking about, rolling blackouts, that's because it's like all the stuff gets turned on at once, right? And so then you can't meet that, and it maybe happens 3 or 4, 8 times a year kind of thing, right? And the reality is, and there's a couple things. One is fleet applications and EVs in general are perfectly designed to help maximize the efficiency of the grid, because most of the driving that you're doing is in the daytime, right? And then you're plugging in at night and you're charging your car when there's the greatest amount, or truck, when there's the greatest amount of spare capacity. And so yes, there's going to be new demand, but those wires are there, and the thing that's providing the power is happening whether those things are plugging in or not. And what we're actually doing is we're maximizing the grid efficiency, and we're going to improve the ability for the grid to deliver the electricity that we need. So for fleets, the great thing is chargers. As you walk around, there's a ton of charging companies and infrastructure companies that are here, and as we build out the infrastructure, the chargers are really smart. And so yes, they're plugging in, but they're very capable of being turned on and off really quickly and meeting those demand moments. The vehicles themselves, same thing, very smart. You can turn them on, turn them off. There's all kinds of ways to control when the vehicles are actually going to charge. So if there are moments where there's bigger demand on the grid, you don't have to charge right at those moments and can reduce that impact. And then I think fleets are the sort of perfect example of where you can do this sort of managed charging. And the next big one's going to be bidirectional. And that means basically not only are we going to, vehicles are going to get charged to be able to meet their fleet needs, but there's going to be a point at which those vehicles are also turning into grid assets. So they're starting to, and actually you can buy a Ford right now, and you can have that Ford power your home. There's a story of someone who owned a Rivian, a doctor, and during one of the recent storms, their power was knocked out, and they used the Rivian to be able to perform one of the surgeries that they had to do by powering everything. And so it gives a sense of it's going to work in both directions. But there's going to be challenges, and we have to do this really in a smart way and make sure that we build the grid of the future to meet the transportation of the future, and fleets are going to be a big part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are massive assets that are coming on the grid. Well, I guess you can look at it in two different ways, and I think the way you described is they are assets for the grid. And as we talk to utilities, we think more and more utilities are looking at it in that way as well. Yes, it's a challenge, but if you do it in a smart way, there's this massive opportunity to turn them into a way to benefit the grid, as you were saying. If you can turn those on at the ideal time, that's a way for utilities to sell more electricity using the same infrastructure. And there's an awesome opportunity in that because as they sell more electricity through the same infrastructure, it essentially puts downward rate pressure which is great for everybody, especially lower income folks who are struggling to pay their electric bill right now. If we can find ways to turn electric vehicles into a force to drive rates down, I mean, that's another great benefit in addition to the reduced air pollution. So a massive benefit there. I'm curious, can you share from your experience, and we've heard some really great stories about Rivians and Ford. What are some of the other challenges that you see for us turning those vehicles into assets in the grid? Because it's not the easiest problem to solve right now, I'd say.
Well, I think one of them is fleet managers who have a responsibility to, they're doing a job. Their job is to have this fleet procured and then manage it on a daily basis to meet the operational need. And so right now they have to go through this process of learning this new technology that works differently. And so, that is true for the driver all the way up through every part of the system. So that's just one, obvious problem or challenge is that fleet managers who absolutely know what they're doing better than anyone in terms of optimizing their fleets and how they meet their needs have to learn how to optimize this new technology. But the cool thing is groups like us, we work with them on all over the country and help fleet managers work through that process. So what are the things that you have to do to develop the training? When do you think about building the infrastructure? How much infrastructure do you actually need, right? Do you need one charger per vehicle? Or can you manage it in a system that allows for a reduced number of chargers? Should you have DC fast chargers? Those are the really powerful, high-power chargers. Or should we be using level 2 chargers, which for the people out there that don't deal in the sort of EV nerd space, a DC fast charger, is somewhere in the 100 to up to 300 kilowatts. It's a big, huge power system. The level 2 charger, which is what most people might use when they're out in the wild, is like your dryer, and it's a good way to think about the difference between the two. Everybody has essentially a 220 in their house already. And so in a lot of systems, that's going to be the same thing. Another kind of big challenge, I think, is right now we have to flip the way we think about acquisition. So fleets, generally speaking, they have a capital purchasing budget and they have an operational budget. Running a gas vehicle is really expensive. You have an incredible amount of maintenance. You're also tied to the cost of fuel, which has huge peaks and valleys, right? Like we've seen it just recently. It was up to $4 or $5 a gallon, and now we're back to $2 or $3 a gallon. And so fleets have to respond to that, and that's a huge impact to businesses. It's a huge impact to cities. And what's happening though is people are starting to rethink this and realize they might need to up their capital purchasing, right, to buy those vehicles, but they're going to save a ton of money over time because the operational costs are so much less. Not only in fuel costs, but also EVs don't have the same maintenance problems. You don't have all these complicated parts of burning fuel that break. An electric motor is a very efficient, very simple piece of hardware. A battery is actually pretty complex, but once it's built and developed, they don't really do anything other than at some point they will need to be replaced. But we're already seeing the miles traveled on batteries is going much further than most people were expecting. So a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities, I think, is the gist.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a personal comment, when the prices of gasoline this last summer were all over the place, and I really appreciated my EV even more then. I never looked at the price at the gas pump. I know everybody with an EV says that, but it's true. I mean, my price for fuel was constant, and I really love that, and I'm sure fleet operators love that too. Keep going off of what you said, as we talk to fleet operators, we've talked to a lot of fleets who were early adopters in this space, and they did have some challenges with that, with demand charges from utilities, which kind of disrupted the savings they were projecting for this. So, fleet operators, as they electrify, they do need to do it in a very smart way. The vehicles are simpler in some ways. There's no spinning pistons and other components in it, so there's less parts, but it's perhaps a little more complicated to make sure you're optimizing the equation here, optimizing the system. And that's what we're trying to do is to help those folks make sure that they achieve all of those benefits that they set out to gain from electrifying their fleet, because there definitely is massive savings to be had as long as you do this in a very smart way, a managed way, and that's what we're trying to help folks with. So awesome. Well, I guess one last point here is, one of the other challenges we've seen, especially from utilities, is how do you work with all of these different vehicles and all of the different chargers, and and there's all these different manufacturers, there's all these different players out there, and they all kind of speak a different language, and they all work in a slightly different way. And so making this a smart system isn't an easy task when every group is kind of operating in their own way right now. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on how we can work towards ensuring that there's standards and ways that we can make systems interoperable as folks begin to invest in their electrification future.
Yeah. So, and actually, I'll come back to that in 1 second. I realize one thing too about fleets, just as an opportunity, and when you're bringing up your own driving experience, the thing I think that's really amazing about fleet electrification and why it should be such a big priority, as we're in this early stage market, we're right now in the early stage of market adoption, and even though we're about to see this thing just take off. Fleets provide an opportunity for the demonstration at scale, and every fleet driver is a consumer. And so, you get to experience all of the awesome things that EVs provide. They are quiet. They have an incredible amount of acceleration. Like, it's incredible. And one of the things that you start to learn, and some people don't, if you don't own an EV, you don't know how awesome it is to not have to go to the gas station anymore. And fleets experience that as well. And it's actually a huge cost for fleets because they have to manage that fuel acquisition and then the refueling of the vehicles. And EVs make that much simpler, right? The way that they can do that on site. But to this idea of interoperability, and to come back to that, I'm going to steal one of the things that you said, which I think is, I thought you created a great analogy, which is the idea of standards for nuts and bolts, right? And right now, there are two different systems, right? But roughly two systems where in any part of the world, if you build something and it's going to be put together by nuts and bolts, it's the same globally, right? And that makes a big difference because then you can send a schematic and you can send it somewhere and it can get built almost anywhere. And I think we are at that stage of transportation electrification where we have to really start developing those standards. But it is applied to a bunch of different places, and there's two things happening. One is I think NEVI is going to play a big role in helping establish some of the standards. So that's the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Network. It was passed through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and so right now the administration, through what's called the Joint Office, is basically helping establish standards so that in roughly every 50 miles on major travel corridors, we're going to have a charger. And those standards, though, what they're doing is they're establishing reliability standards. So every charger has to have a certain amount of reliability, meaning it'll be there and it'll work when you show up and you need to charge. And that'll be really important for consumers, but it's really important for fleets. There's the idea of the actual charging systems where ultimately they have to have the ability to have to have this interoperability and this communication standards that are also going to be critical. Security, right? That's another part of this, where the security that exists, and we have all these like OCCPs that are these wonky terminology that gets used in the industry, but it makes a lot of sense that we're at this stage where we have to really define all these standards very quickly because we're building at scale. It's not just a one-off or a two-off, and I think part of this with fleets is, and really with all of it happening, is EVs are inevitable. And so we're at the point now where it's no longer a question of, are we going to be driving electric? It is happening globally. There are countries that are making commitments to be electric. There are states in the U.S. that have made commitments that they're going to be electric starting in 2035. And so it's no longer a question of if, it's a question of when. And so the work that we do with Panasonic, and that you all are doing through your efforts, and then at the Electrification Coalition and the other groups that we work with, I think we're working very quickly to make that when even faster.
Absolutely, that's our goal, is to bring that when to now. We want to electrify these fleets and all transportation as quick as we can, and bring those benefits to our society and the world, so we can all enjoy a better world here. So, well, Ben, I think we're at our time here. Thanks so much for sharing all of your thoughts. Thanks for all the work that your group is doing. We support you guys, and yeah, we're glad to be partners with you here. So, and thanks to all of you for joining us here at the talk. If you're a fleet, if you're a utility, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to hear about your plans for electrifying and see how we can support you in that. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Philip.
Thanks, guys. Fantastic stuff. Loved it. You guys can go ahead. I'm not going to keep you. I'm not going to keep you. You got more things to do. A novel class of circuit materials designed to enable new and more pliable